Media webinar series. I'm Kimberly Underwood, Senior Editor at AFCEA International Signal Magazine. I'd like to welcome you today to our webinar called Achieving Continuous ATO Through Security, which is sponsored by Security Compass. Entities operating in the federal sector face the hurdle of Authority to Operate, or ATO process. It can take months to achieve ATO status, but in today's fast-moving business environment, and with an automated development security operations pipeline, or DevSecOps pipeline, a faster approach is necessary. We have two experts today who will discuss how to pursue a continuous ATO approach. They will go over tool categories and architecture concepts that can provide appropriate, reusable, and pre-authorized components that provide cybersecurity, speed, and assurance. First, I'd like to introduce you to Altez Villani, who is the Director of Insights Research at Security Compass. Altez manages the overall software development research vision and the associated research team at the company. Prior to joining Security Compass, he was a Senior Research Director and Executive Advisor at Infotech Research Group and a Senior Manager at KPMG. Altez is on the Safe Code Technical Leadership Council, the CIO Strategy Council, and several IEEE working groups that examine cybersecurity and privacy challenges. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Hassan Yassar, who is the Technical Director of Continuous Deployment of Capability Group at Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute. SCI is a federally funded Research and Development Center, or FFRDC, that specializes in software development for the military and other governmental organizations. Hassan leads an engineering team at SCI that leverages DevSecOps, agile software, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, and other emerging technologies used in creating a smart software platform or pipeline. Hassan has more than 25 years of experience in all phases of secure software development and information modeling processes. He also is an adjunct faculty member at CMU's Hines College and Institute of Software Research, where he currently teaches software and security and DevOps, engineering for deployment and operation. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our two software innovators in just a minute. As their presentations go along, I'd like to encourage you all to submit questions. And to do that, you'll use the Ask a Question box on your webinar console. It's the blue button on your top right. And after their discussion, we'll have Q&A for as long as time permits during this hour-long session. I'd also like to point you to the Resources tab on your platform. You can download information, including the slide presentation, on how to develop a continuous ATO environment. Very useful. We'll also have a few poll questions along the way. If you could kindly respond via the webinar platform when those pop up on your screen. Altez, could you start us off and give us a bit of background about the ATO process? Altez?
Thank you, and thanks everybody for taking the time to attend the webinar today. To kick it off, our agenda today is going to go through the following. We're going to start first by talking about the current challenges with ATO. This is just to level set the context, and then look at aiming for this continuous ATO model. We'll then talk about some of the governance of continuous ATO, which will include some of the systems, some of the processes involved with this, and finally conclude with an architectural view on the systems to enable the continuous ATO. And then we will have an opportunity to conduct some Q&A. Next slide, please. Hassan, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. Thanks, Altez. Thanks for having me in here as well. So let's really understand what is ATO means. Like, I know we have been talking about authorizing and operate, authorize to operate, and what does it really means that? What is the context of the ATO with respect to the software delivery and deployment? So authority to operate is authorizing the system and before placing into the production network. Production network means like the end users. End users are going to use the system. That systems has hardware and software component in it. And so somebody has to approve that. Somebody has to, or somebody as some organizational team member has to approve any application or systems goes into production environment. When I say somebody, actually, there's a people-oriented, like people has to approve that process. Somebody has to take a risk, which is the key staff members are in the ATO process are either authorizing officials, as an example, or maybe ISSO or the secret assessors. That's their job to authorize the system. It's a person involved, it's a human involved in that process. So what they looked at, they're looking for the systems, and based on the risk management framework, which is 800-37, I will explain more. And then looking for the system with respect to the risk, and identify and find out what possible risk has been addressed, and looking for objective evidence from the either the team members or the system or some sort of evidence. If there is no evidence from the dev team, as the ATO team, they have to look at in that perspective, find out and all this control has been addressed or not. As a result of that process, that group is generating a letter. They're saying, yes, we looked at, we approved, now we can use into the production environment, which is basically creating some letters or some approval stamps. And also this is important, we should remember that because we will be talking about how we generate artifacts throughout our sessions, where we can collect that artifacts. Go to the next slide, please. So why it really matters? And typical work that the assessor does, and looking for the controllers from 800-53. And assume that there is no system like automated system for right now. And typical situation right now, and assessors are looking for controllers from the 800-53 and typically 924 as a given system as an example. So they were listing the controls, they were listing the what families are, what is the relationship with the implementation, giving a guidance. So manually identifying each controller as a high, low risk, medium, what the mitigation strategies are. So it's a really lengthy process. Somebody has to keep track that, some system has to keep, even though if there's a system for understanding what the risk controllers are, but at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision about the high, low, medium, and either spending a time for the systems and find out the vulnerabilities or make sure that they have been addressed properly based on the mitigation. So it's a time-lengthy process. And that's why important to build up a ATO and a continuous ATO eventually. And other things also, and why it matters to get an approval, because we always build up the systems, and we're going to cover up complaints perspective too. When we deliver any software, any capabilities to our end users, and we should really address the governance pieces, security pieces, or other requirements as well. Because sometimes automation is not really solving that problem. Somebody has to put a stamp, because when we go into the production and live environment, we cannot go back easily, because if something happens in an environment, then somebody will be responsible. Let's go to the next slide, please.
Oh, we actually have the poll question.
Yeah, so I think it'd be important. Let's find out from the audience, from their perspective as well. Like, how are you currently conducting your ATO controls today? Hassan and I have been having conversations, and a lot of what we're seeing is based on spreadsheets that are being kind of handed back and forth. It'll be interesting to see from our audience, how are you currently managing your controls? And maybe we can get some responses up there and find out.
So while you're reading the poll, probably Altaz, maybe you can dive into the current situation right now, what I see in specific in DoD. Mm-hmm. And one thing is we are getting ATO approval just before moving the system into the production network. So what really telling us, it's a last activities before the production environment and waiting a months and months. So which basic piling up a lot of work or the bigger chunk of application that takes longer to get approved, because assessors has to look at a big work instead of looking for a small incremental work. They have to look at overall systems. It takes time to get an approval, so it usually takes about 6 months. So I'm assuming we got the poll result, right? We can look at the poll results too?
Not yet. Sorry.
Not yet. So I'll continue. And based on that, the 6 months time frame, it is too lengthy for any application that we are building, and sometimes takes longer than. So another things, and since we are waiting, like get an approval 6-month time frame, and program manager, and they will take some risk and accept that because an end user would like to get the product as quick as possible. Now a dev team finished that and testers completed them, and now becoming ATO is becoming a gatekeeper. So when it becomes a gatekeeper, and somebody has to accept the risk. So authorizing officials are responsible for accepting the risk. And when they accept the risk, it's taking a risk based on the knowledge, because either they have to push it, if not, they have to look at in detail. That takes a longer time frame. So once they generate an ATO letter, it's about it's good for 3 years. But we know that we are keep changing the systems, and it's not good for all the time because we're not delivering a system that stays always 3 years. Now we are changing the system frequently with the new modern technologies. When the change occur in the systems, and we had to go back and reassess again, reauthorize the system, now it's costing a time and money. Then we assess the new system, now we are looking for overall system again, because we don't know how much we change that component. We don't know how much we change in terms of the work-wise, in terms of the content. So assessors are looking for overall system again, looking for complete systems.
Right, thanks, Hassan. It looks like in response to how do you manage your ATO controls, about 31% of you use manual spreadsheets. 9% use automated systems, and the majority, or almost 60%, you guys use a combination of the two. Altez, what does this say to you, these results?
Yeah. So I think the one thing that I found as sort of a confirmation from what I've seen is the degree of automation. And it's not surprising that there's some kind of hybrid approach. So there are some parts of the process that are probably automated or integrated in some way. But later on, we'll talk about what does it mean when we try to integrate our continuous ATO within DevSecOps environments. And I think this is going to eventually surface. But the results, from my perspective, are consistent with what I'm hearing. Hassan, from your end as well?
It is a similar fashion. I'm a little bit surprised that the automation perspective, like fully 9% seems. And I was expecting a little bit more, because with the new modern technologies and maybe of the business, I was expecting to hear more automations. That means we have work to do, Altez, for next couple of years. So yeah, and then for the manual steps, and that's also the as expecting result. But the combination of both, if we are really touching about the manual automation, for me, it still is the manual steps. So I'm looking for more as it looks like we are still 90% are doing some sort of manual, because once you put the manual steps in it, it's going to delay the process. We would like to get automation as high as possible. That's our goal. So let's go to the next slide, and let's deep dive into what the risk management framework is, because as we said, ATO persons looking for the risk management perspective. So what is the risk management framework? And that actually came from the NIST 837. It's replacing the legacy certification accreditation process in information system, mainly government, federal government. That became a good model for most of the organization already. So it's giving RMF is giving a guidelines then how we apply the risk process in the software lifecycle perspective, and not only the system lifecycle, I should say, the system development lifecycle perspective, looking for what type of controls we have, and then implement into the system lifecycle. It's more disciplined approach. So instead of looking for the 800-53 has many controls in it, giving more guidance, what needs to be done with respect to the risk, and how can we lay it out into our system development lifecycle, where we start, and how can we go the next step. Let's go to the next slide. So RMF has the 6 steps from the NIST 837. So first step is categorizing the information systems, what type of systems we are building, to basically assessing what we have. So I put a kind of like a red color each of the definition that directly from the 800-37 documentation. So each of the actually red write-up is giving information about what we have to do and what is the clue of the systems. And when we go to the select state section, and we would like to identify what the security controllers are for a specific information is selected. So it's a very key component here. We have to identify what information we are dealing, and what the controllers are applicable for that information that we are building. There's a direct relationship. But when we look at information, we're going to cover up more. We will be discussing about the risk perspective of the business. That's kind of an important value. And third step goes into the implementation detail and how we implement the controls in the system that we are building. That is basically the coding and architecture design coding phases. And as a result of implementation, we would like to see the outcome of the implementation, which is basic assessment pieces, and how we are generating the artifacts, such as using static analysis or type of security testing, or some artifact has been generated from the system, then we can assess are we implemented correctly or not. And then as a result of these steps, it is creating some artifacts for us. Remember that AO person has to create some package, right? Some letters. So they are looking for the letters as a result of assessment. Assessment will give some output from the system so we can authorize the system. Once we authorize it and goes into the production network, so we will monitoring where we are in terms of our security assessments. And then if we see something is changing, because we know that security is a living things, it is not a static all the time. It changed based on the language we use. It changed based on the dependency libraries we use. It depends on the platform. So it's really changing sometimes. We cannot say that we build up everything is great and now we stamped it. It's perfectly working fine. There's nothing in the security. There's many examples that we find out in history is telling us, and there are some open source code has been used for years and years, and 15 years later, we see some vulnerabilities in it. So it's not guaranteed that, like OpenSSL or using the shell shock problems, other problem, we may see longer than what has been produced a long time ago. So we have to really monitor that so we can go back and see where we are. Maybe there's something else. It's kind of like a continuous process. Go to the next slide, please. And for the typical characteristics of RMF implementation, again, this is directly from the 800-37 write-up. It's really promoting the near real-time risk management if we do it properly well, if we do automate that process, which actually, and RMF says you have to have a continuous monitoring process to implement risk management. It is encouraging the leadership to get the necessary information as a cost-effective ways. So now start from ATO, but actually if we are following the RMF guidelines, we should really implement that automation perspective because that's what we're expecting. The key point is I would like to call out, it is integrating the information security into the enterprise architect and system development lifecycle. So we cannot address the security just based on the testing. We have to look at the security as based on our system that we are building, that we should align with the system development lifecycle. That's a really tough question to address that. And how can we address alignment with the system development lifecycle with enterprise architects? So we're going to give a lot of clue for you. And we have to really link to the risk management into the information system level, like what type of risk we are addressing, where we are in organization risk, which one is a high, low, medium. And eventually, as a result of that traceability perspective, we're establishing responsible accountability. Who's going to be responsible if something goes wrong with the systems? If something happened in the production environment, who will be responsible and to answer that any type of outage or a data breach in that environment? So that goes back to the system lifecycle integration, because we have to know all the artifacts and dependencies, all the libraries, what we have done at the past. That's the reason we need to have a written letter from a person that what our artifacts are, so we know exactly that we accepted at the moment. We can go back and look at it. So it's not a random things we did. And let's go to the next slide. So now we are switching the continuous ATO perspective as the part of DoD working groups, which is DSAC groups. We have been working for the defining what continuous authorization means. So if you look at the RMF perspective, RMF it's kind of a continuous process, right? But it is requiring some elements of implementation, like how we select the controls and how we really assess the environments or the libraries, or how we really build up the implementation details. So when we drill down that implementation, there are three major elements we are looking for it in the RMF perspective, because RMF is not just looking for a technical security perspective. It is also human involved. Because end of the day, person has to decide and what risk they will take it. That's also the requiring the team members as well to knowledgeable enough. So continuous ATO process is basically authorizing the platform and process and then products, eventually building up a system so we can trust the system. It's basic building about trustworthiness has been established. It is basically setting up the continuous risk determination because we know that risk is changing. And then also it's giving us a capability for the near real-time visualization of security postures. So there are three components of the ATO. So we have to authorize what the platform. Platform is where we are building the code, where we are building the system. When we build up the systems, we are building a system generating a code and using a platform, which is DevSecOps platform we are using it. And then we are following up with architecture, which goes back to the enterprise architect concept, how we are architecting our system. There are multiple modules in it. If we authorize any of the modules, we can reuse again because we would like to shrink the time. If there is no continuous ATO, it will take them 6 months because every time we have to reanalyze the systems. Now we are looking for modularization perspective. And there is a process piece. It's like we have to put a process. We have to authorize the process. Process means implementing about the continuous integration, continuous delivery, and implementing about DevOps practices. And these practices will help us to build up a continuous basis. If you're looking about implementation detail, if you're looking for assessment pieces, to achieve that implementation assessment, it is requiring a continuous activities, such as continuous integration. When we build up the continuous integration, that goes back to the architecture element again. How can we build up iterative incremental work into the continuous integration perspective so we can build up CI/CD pipeline to authorize the process? And other things, as we looked at RMF requirements, we would like to establish the responsibilities, accountabilities. And how we establish the responsibility accountabilities based on the feedback. What we are getting a feedback and looking for what assessors asking, looking for what the security persons or the teams are saying that what type of controls and implemented. And as I have been teaching at the class in CME for years, and even the master's level students, they don't know the security requirements yet. They are the CS students. So now we have to train them. We have to give them an information, what needs to be done for a specific control. It's not expecting everybody knows to implement SQL injection in their code perspective. I'm not expecting everybody with expert for the cross-site scripting or the using a right cryptographic information. If you are talking about the very low-level vulnerabilities, it's specific to the buffer overflow, integer overflow, it is really hard to catch that type of errors. So now we have to give the feedback in an educated way and in a matter way so we can train the folks giving right feedbacks. And third item is about authorizing the team, which is training the team. Make sure that our team got trained well, understand the security concept. It's a journey. Whoever really assessing the environment, whoever looking for the code perspective, we can train them. We can build up a continuous learning experimentation problem environment so we can train that. So basically looking for three elements. If we authorize the platform, we are technically solving 80% of the approval because most of controllers are specific to the either platform or the dependencies or libraries. We are generating a tiny piece of the code, which is 20% of the code. Let's go to the next slide.
So while you're going to the next slide, I just wanted to inject, based on conversations and interactions with others in the industry as well, what I found is a lot of our DevOps and pipelines are focused on speed of delivery. When we start to talk about concepts like risk, there isn't an easy way to go in and integrate these things. So we've got to now think about how do we make concepts like risk an inherent part of development. We've got other metrics and things that we do in terms of delivery, and we'll start to drill down a little bit deeper and talk about how we can start to inject in terms of giving us the evidence that's needed for us to be able to go and attest that the stuff that we're doing matches a particular risk threshold. Go ahead, Hassan.
Oh, actually, sorry to interrupt, but we have the results of our second poll question.
Oh, great.
You guys had asked, what is the average time people are seeing to get ATO approval? And it looks like, only about 13% are seeing less than 3 months. Around 3 months, about 10%. 6 months is the most common with 29%. Around 9 months, 9.7%, and around a year, just less than 29%. And luckily, only about 9.7% for longer than a year. What do you guys think of these timelines? And obviously, I know you'll speak to kind of how the DevSecOps process will make getting ATO approvals taking less time. But can you speak to that? Thanks.
Yeah, I think it goes to what Hassan was just talking about. It takes a while for us to go through this, and there are different components to it. There's a systems perspective to this. We also need to think about how we can go in there and bring people along from a governance standpoint to get this all aligned as well. And I think, as we go through successive slides, this will start to flesh itself out. I know we've got a lot of slides. So Hassan, you want to give some quick thoughts on the response
Sure.
as well?
Exactly. It's actually it's a expected result, by the way, which is giving a right picture of what we estimated, what I have been seeing so far. And it is going to take time because it will not get solved right away. Because if you remember the ATO process we just a couple of minutes ago, it's the building the right team cultures. It's building the platform. It is building the architecture support. And also, we're going to cover up more toward our session as well, building up the right relationship with the security team members and also the other stakeholders. We're always looking for as different group and units, but ATO teams are part of our systems that we are building. So that's the reason we don't see that direct relationship, because always we are punting ball each other. I did my job, it's your job. I'm not going to deal anymore with you. And we are looking for as the gatekeeper, because we do at the end. And other things as the perfect things I haven't seen so far, because we look at ATO as the large chunk size of the work we do at end of the system lifecycle, which is very close to the production environment. If we give them too much work for anybody, there is no way we can get it done in a short time frame, because we are piling up the work in a longer time frame and then handing over to the person. We are saying, can you do it in a 1 day? If you ask that question for another person, different direction, says, okay, I'm going to give you this feature. Can you develop me in a day? It's the same mentality. We are expecting a high return and a large size of the work from a team and get it done in a short time frame. That's the typical scenario. So that's the reason that DevSecOps is going to really help us and achieve the continuous perspective. So fundamentally, if you look at the DevSecOps concept or DevOps concept, we are building as a continuous fashion of the capabilities. Behind the scene, we are building iterative incremental development. What iterative incremental means, we are delivering a capabilities, or we are building a features. I mean, we would like to deliver that, but sometimes we may not be, but we are building a code, we are building any features on an incremental basis. Each incremental basis, and again, that's a definition from Agile mindset, it is creating some shippable, some useful features as a result of each iteration. So take that iteration pieces and apply in the continuous authorization and put what the RMF is expecting from us, basically spreading the chunk of assessment work throughout the life cycle of what we do. Throughout the life cycle from the system life cycle perspective, what the controllers are, and define the controllers, define the risk assessments, and mapping to the backlogs. If anybody following the Agile principles, they have to have a backlog mechanisms in their case management systems and define what type of security controls will be applicable for the backlog. So technically, we are solving the assessment pieces in the first day, in the first iteration right away. We're not expecting the ATO will tell us, hey, do this. We are saying, here's our controllers we have implemented. It's actually another job from the security perspective. Security people should be part of our backlog planning, should be part of our control assessments. They are not separate team anymore. That's the reason DevSecOps is a higher level umbrella. It's giving us a capability so we can insert that. We're going to cover up more in detail. And we will look for the security, the monitoring, how we are doing well, and how much we do for any type of risk tolerances, and for any application review, static analysis, or dynamic analysis we do. We have to generate the reports, because if we put the reports in a manual fashion, it will take time. That's the reason I said at the beginning, I would like to see more automation, because if you do some manual, still you're delaying the process. You may be generating a static analysis result automatically done from the SAS tools, but still we are generating a report in a written format. It will take time. It's a manual process. So like just relying into the CI and say, yes, we are done the static analysis, we are good. I did that, my job. No, it's not enough. We haven't aligned that. And lastly, about the risk tolerance monitoring, we have to really find out where we are in terms of the risk perspectives. So anything else you want to, I'll tell you, I know it's a lot of loaded content, but maybe we can talk later.
Yeah, there's a lot in here, and even with some of the working groups that I'm a part of, we are really trying to see how we can crack this nut. So as we go towards increased automation here. Now let's keep moving, Hassan.
Let's go to the next slide then. So another things I would like to highlight, another NIST document I really like, that 837 is describing what we should do with the monitoring perspective. Even though when you don't have a fully DevSecOps environment, we can take an advantage of what the continuous monitoring means. So once you do the implementation of continuous monitoring, that will save a lot of time and money, and especially time is equal to money. So we can really put the change management system, configuration management environment, and then how we maintained our risk, how we map those risks into the code perspective, it is requiring a continuous monitoring. So behind the scene, continuous monitoring also is requiring to build up a fully system development lifecycle, which is DevSecOps. We're going to talk about it. Let's go to the next slide. And so we can discuss what the outcomes that we would like to see from continuous ATO. So like typically, when we see a continuous ATO implementation, and we would like to really use any type of containerization techniques if possible. Again, that depends on the system architectures. Having a containerization concept or having a reusable components will definitely save a time. But if your architecture is compatible, if you're able to make it a reusable components, if you're able to create a layered architecture in your systems, and that will easy to get an acceptance or moving fast, because once you build up application stack, let's say you have a 3-tier web application as an example, then we would like to go as modular perspective. We may able to build up one of the interfaces, just interfaces has done only for logging mechanisms. So get that features completed, which is going to be part of our modularity, maybe microservices, maybe RESTful API, maybe SOAP, whatever architecture you have. You can bundle that architectures into the one container that can be Docker, maybe other type of technologies. It's going to make much easier. If you don't have a containerization concept, still you can build up a reusable components. Like in the old days, we were using a DLL as one example. DLL is one of the capabilities as part of the component. So, and address any type of technical depth by refactoring your systems. So I don't want to go each of the write-ups. I'm just going to call out the important ones and build up a fully pipeline that was supporting the various and the technology specifically. There is no a single pipeline will solve every solution, but the methodologies are the same. So we have to build up a continuous integration, continuous delivery perspective. We have to build up end-to-end pipeline for a specific architectural system that we are building. There are hundreds of ways of building the pipeline, but abstract model is the same. You should have a continuous integration process. To achieve the continuous integration process, you should have a good repository management. And you should have an automation, test automation, and test integration in that process, in that environment you're using it. And literally, we have to really put a governance into DevSecOps perspective. Governance are, which is compliances and regulations and risk management in the components. And lastly, I would like to call out, and we would like to build up a SLAs and SLOs for each of the modules that we are building, and there is a service level agreement, and for that modules that is being served in the production, because this is basically describing what this model will do and what the purpose out of it and what objective we will do. This is kind of more about our internal team member will define objectives and work around the environments. I think lastly, I would like to call out, and instead of really doing a gatekeeper, let's make it audit perspective. As we know that security is a living thing. It is not a one-time thing we can go and say done, but we should have an audit, which is should have a logging mechanisms or artifacts or other capabilities we can audit it. So by knowing the risk, and we can take it. If you don't know what the problems are, it is very difficult to take the risk. By knowing the risk, by knowing the mitigation, we can tolerate that. If we don't know a risk, if we don't have any idea what we are dealing, it's always difficult to implement RMF or the ATO because it's becoming a gatekeeper perspective. Okay. Let's go to the next slide.
I think as well, just while you're going to the next slide, Hassan. So this is where part of the gap exists, is trying to take a modular approach, which is architectural, and trying to merge that with things that are based on compliance or regulatory requirements and things like that. So as far as what we see in the slide here, you'll notice at the middle of the slide, we've got our typical software development lifecycle where we go through plan, code, build, test, release, and operate. And at the very top, we've got our different environments. We may go in through a development environment, a test environment, a production environment, and we overlay on top of this, in addition to our infra security, the different types of security controls that we put in place. So we will have, as an example, preventive controls up at the front end. Then we'll go in there, and as we are developing, now we need some detection mechanism to see whether or not we are doing things the right way. So we end up with certain detective controls. And I'm not going to drain the slide to talk about each of these. The assumption is that we have an understanding from a security perspective of what these things mean. And then we've also got our responsive controls once it's in a production environment. So once it's there, how do we loop back to what Hassan was talking about earlier and take some of these things and feed them back into our dev cycle? So this becomes now a way that we've been using to go in and use security. So as we successively go deeper into this now, we're trying to bring together the idea of having these architectural components. We've got security components, and how do we now intersect that with risk? And that's going to help us build out this continuous ATO model that we're describing to you. Next slide, please. So Hassan talked about the NIST RMF as a risk management approach. That's at a very high level. Eventually, you've got to bring risk management down to when we actually need to conduct our risk assessments. So, for example, with ISO 31010 as an open standard, there are several stages in the risk assessment process. They've outlined 7. We go through the elicitation from the stakeholders. So generally we'll do this either through brainstorming, or we'll get a group together of experts. We might go through interviews or surveys, and then we identify the risk. And the risk is identified through classification schemes that we have had now for some time. It is contextual to each organization. It is contextual to the architecture. It's contextual based on regulatory frameworks. And then we move on and we start to look at what's driving some of these risks. And we've talked about techniques in the past where we would have like either fishbone diagrams or things like that can help us to derive root causes of where some of these risks are coming from. We then analyze these controls, and a bow tie analysis is just one such approach where you can talk about the controls and how do the controls map to mitigations, and where therein lies multiple ways and combinations of trying to derive how we might be able to mitigate some of this risk. Looking at understanding the consequences, the likelihoods, then giving us an opportunity to select between these options, and then somehow feeding this back into a risk register. Now, the risk assessment process we have here goes through each of these stages. The question, of course, is how do we take this stuff and how do we create a mechanism through which we can automate most, if not all, of this information here? We understand the missing components that we've got. We understand where security sits. Now the question is, how do we integrate between risk and security and then look for automation capabilities? Next slide, please. So when we achieve continuous ATO, there are different stakeholders that fit around this idea of trying to balance the need to go really, really quickly. And yet at the same time, we've got the need to manage our risk. So we'll have, for example, our dev teams, and they go through their own life cycle called the software development life cycle. They'll take a look at requirements. They'll do some kind of threat modeling. We have some security architecture, looking at secure coding, static analysis, things like that. And then we move on to the testing phase where we'll have perhaps some DAST, some fuzz testing, maybe some pen testing happens here as well. And we move on into the ops side. In the ops side, as Hassan was describing, we've got our container security, SecOps teams will come in. They're monitoring what's happening. And tying all of this together to help drive this to make sure that we're aligned with where risk fits in. All the way to the left, we've got these standards, and they go through a policy life cycle. Standards do change, frameworks do change, but there's a policy lifecycle management attached to this. So we've got compliance and audit happening as well. And historically, we focused on just one or two of these life cycles. But as we consider DevSecOps, we are essentially looking now at the integration of all of these life cycles. So many times when we're having conversations, we talk about how Agile introduced the ability to go and align with the business requirements. And then we ended up with DevOps, which helped us to create automated pipelines that would give us continuous delivery, continuous integration. And now when we talk about DevSecOps, it is taking that to an even bigger sort of abstraction, larger abstraction, where we now have all of these things that are not just in the technical teams, but they're also outside the technical teams, security teams, risk teams, compliance teams, and they're all looking for ways to collaborate with each other. And therein lies some of the problem, as we talked about earlier. There's no unified way to create a mechanism by which all of these groups can essentially collaborate with each other. The integrations exist largely as point-to-point integrations at this point. So thankfully, there's an emergence of DevSecOps tools now around balanced development, which help us to manage speed and risk, different from the value stream categories that existed so far. This is really focused on trying to bring together and integrating with each of these systems and pulling that together. Next slide, please.
I think I'll take it from here, Altaz. So what I would like to really say here specifically, and as Altaz said a few times, there are some preparations of the risk, which is how we understand the risk perspectives are. We usually done the risk in a separate entity in our organizations. And most of organization has a risk management team. And another organization, which is our responsible for security perspective as a unit, as a team. So when we look at that, all these people are silos. All are different, either in different cadence or different tools that are using. But when we look at the system lifecycle perspective, so we need to spread the security into the everywhere in our phases of lifecycle. So when we look at the phase of lifecycle, we have some feature requests we do. There is an architecture phases, there is a design phases, there is a coding and testing. Each of the phases is done from either a system, maybe using a DevSecOps automated environment. But when we look at this automation concept, as a human, we generate the code. As a human, we design the systems. As a human, we identify the risk. So whatever we gave to the platform as automated platform, that platform will do based on what we are asking. So that's the reason we said we have to really teach the people and let them understand what the security elements are, because it's not a one person's responsibility anymore. It's everybody's responsibilities. But as a community, we're expecting the security person will be responsible for fixing any security defects in the system just before it goes to the production. And it's not the realistics. And based on the DevSecOps survey for a couple of years, we find out that there's one security expert. There are 100 developers. So how are we going to bring that one expert into 100 developer organization? We can merge by sharing what needs to be done. We can integrate the security in every phase of life cycle as a specific to the future that we are building. Start from the inception and always to the deployment, there are certain tasks needs to be done. Each of the tasks is generating artifacts for us. Like if you do the architecture analysis based on the threat modeling, we can do the architecture risk analysis, an example, that would generate output for us. When we go to the development phases, we do the static analysis that we're going to generate the code practices for us. When we go to the delivery time, we can look at the container security, we can look at the pen testings, but each of them are related to each other. So we don't want to run and static analysis just the sake of static analysis. We have to map those static analysis based on what we define as the risk is a very key component. Because end of the day, we are looking for how much time we can spend and what is the relationship to the organization or domain we are in. So we have to really tie it back to our security risk so we can carry out the life cycle. We can see what we said, what we implemented, and then let's verify what has been done. If you look at this perspective, so we are creating a small chunk size of the work. We are looking for, yes, this feature has some security problems we may see on it. So basically spreading threat modeling in agile mindset, defining what the threat is for a specific features, define your mitigation strategies are implemented. That's the reason it's a continuous process in every phase of life cycle. But when we do DevOps without thinking about the security, that's the reason actually we call that DevSecOps now, and we are emphasizing the security importance in our delivery lifecycle. Going fast is great, but we don't want to fail fast.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, it's interesting, Hassan. I wonder if we can just throw up a poll while you're talking on this slide as well and find out, let's see where the audience is right now regarding their degree of automation and integration. Sorry, Hassan, while they're responding to this, let's see what sort of comes up from that. It'll be interesting.
Exactly. So the other things I would like to call out that we have to really share the information with other stakeholders as well. And how we can share that information, there are multiple ways we can share them, either using email or the report. But what DevOps is really saying us, we should share the feedback on time. If I am using a code, a testing, let's share the result immediately as a result of the test that's been done with the stakeholders. Remember that not everybody knows to write a secure coding. But if our tools is giving some feedback to the team members, here is the problem that we find out, here is the vulnerability, here is the solutions. So that information is available already. And if you look at this, the CVs or the NVIDIA databases or CWS, information is available for everyone. But we have to really give the information timely to the team members. They can address problems immediately. It's basically timing is important to give them a right feedback.
Yeah. Let's take a look at our poll results. What did we end up with?
It looks like as far as how many people have their DevSecOps practices integrated with their ATO process, about 55% do not have those two integrated. About 27% are partially integrated, and then about 17% are actually fully integrated. And what does that tell you guys?
Yeah, so from my perspective, when I look at this, it sounds to me like we are all on the same journey here. There is some level of integration that is being done right now. Even those that are not integrated are looking for ways to try and move forward with some degree of integration here to help us get to a continuous ATO model. A lot of legacy exists around this, which I think, to Hassan's earlier point, talks to some of the changes that need to be made around the cultural side, around the process side as well. But I'll just pause there. Hassan, you have any couple thoughts that you want to add to this as well?
That's really interesting, because at the beginning of the poll, we got about the 9% full automated. Now I see 17% at fully integrated. And that's really telling me that there is a human element still is blocking, or still human is generating some data. If we have a full integration, we should really integrate and generate artifacts automatically from the DevSecOps environment. They should increase our automation perspective. So there is some disconnect here, either a lack of skills maybe, or the lack of other implementation problem, maybe generating for the artifacts problem. That's kind of what I see in this.
Yeah, the fabric that kind of puts it all together, right? Yeah.
Let's go to the next slide. It's a lot of topic we can discuss. I know, Altess. Let's see how much we can cover up.
I know.
In the time.
Okay, so when we talk about combining speed and risk, this is where we start to get into some of the implementation. So you'll notice that we've got the underlying security practices that we had in a previous slide. But when we now look at how do we look at generating the security requirements, there are ways to go in and conduct automated architecture profiling. For example, looking at your source code, you can derive the kind of components that you've got. As an example, you may have a model that you can go in and you can use that as a way to go in and profile your architecture. At the next stage, the artifacts around security, just the classification schemes that we have. We already have taxonomies that exist out there. There are classification schemes. We can classify them based on risk, based on severity, and a lot of this is going to be contextual, but we've got means by which we can generate these artifacts to help us move this forward. It is, again, not based on one team looking at this, but it is based on other systems and other teams providing information that help us to derive what such a taxonomy would look like. And then looking at the threat modeling aspect, for a long time, we've had sort of this diagrammatic approach to threat modeling where we've got data flow diagrams. When we produce such an artifact and hand it over to a development team, for example, there's oftentimes a gap. We've produced an artifact, but the integration with the development team is not always smooth. How do we take a data flow diagram and translate that into something that developers can use as an example? So by looking at it from a slightly different angle, like, for example, security, architecture, traceability, we've got architecture, we've got the artifacts around architecture. Can we track these based on other practices that exist out there, maybe what OWASP has put there or what SANS has put there, or even in the case of some of the regulatory frameworks that are out there, but mapping them now specifically to an architecture, which is a higher level construct. So every time we take that architecture and we implement something against that architecture, we are immediately realizing what we need to do to harden those things. And this is, again, a means of trying to bring down that time so we're not having to go through the same threat modeling exercise every single time. And then finally, looking at things like the security arc reviews, the impact analysis that exists. These are in systems. We can take these, the output from these systems, bring them back up in and say, you know what, we don't need to go through a review every single time. If we map it to an architecture, we know what we've done in the past. How do we now go in there and reuse this? And then when looking at things like our development environment, and also looking at our infrastructure, there are ways to leverage knowledge bases that already exist in digital format and extracting from there. Even when we get to training and providing guidance, we have, yes, we do have training that exists where we might sit down for several hours and go through a particular training portfolio, but it's really now getting to a point where we need to have this contextual, and we're looking at just in time. So micro learning components, for example, linking those specifically to how do we now harden against a particular compliance or regulatory requirement. That's what we can start to pull in. And so secure coding practices, coding guidelines, these are all a part of what can be done. If someone needs to do something with, for example, NIST 853, what does that mean to me as a developer? And the mapping now exists at the architecture level along with the training components. So as we go through this, we know what we now need to do in order to go in and harden these components. Then from the infrastructure side, looking at guidelines that have been provided, we might have, for example, and there are, these artifacts exist digitally where there are policies created where we can now extract from these policies and map them to specific infrastructure components. Now, what eventually ends up happening is as we take all of these artifacts that come out, architectural components, policy components, just-in-time training components, knowledge-based components, and we start to bring these together, what that now does is it gives us a risk profile. If we know that, for example, we went through a code scan, and in that code scan, a developer came back and said, yes, we did this, but we end up with the code scan automated result that comes back and says, hold on, something is amiss here. It gives us an opportunity to tie this in, for example, to just-in-time training and also to modify our architecture. And so all these various artifacts are now evolving as each of us are looking at how we can try to strengthen this from an ATO perspective. And once we get this risk metric, we measure this against the guardrail. What's an acceptable amount of risk that we can take? And historically, we would have had to go through a lot of this stuff in a manual way. But because we are reusing this and we've streamlined this against the architecture and the reusable components, therein lies the opportunity to go in now and to speed this up. Next slide, please. Hassan, you want to land us on?
Sure. So I think that when we look at the overall ATO, so we have to remember that there are other requirements with the compliance perspective. And almost every compliance is like GDPR or FISMA or SOX, HIPAA, name it, and has a similar requirements. Like we looked at the RMF perspective, RMF is not the only as the ATO or the approval perspective. If you are in the healthcare industry, if you're in the financial sector, you have to follow up to certain guidelines. So like the HIPAA has the specific requirement with respect to security. or the GDPR has a specific requirements with respect to security. So when we generalize all these compliances, three things came up from that requirements compliance perspective. All of them are requiring a reporting which is the artifacts. So auditors, either GDPR auditors or the assessors, when they look at it, they are looking for, show me evidence what you have, how you treat the privacy data. Show me evidence on how you treat the PII data as an example. Show me evidence on how your developer are not accessing the production environment, which is the segregation of duties under SOX compliances. So auditors are looking for a reporting, and then to show that reporting, you have a traceability. It's like three elements is the key of the getting any type of approval. So when you are implementing DevSecOps, when you are implementing any software delivery environment, you may be calling it DevSecOps, you may be calling whatever the software delivery environment you have, your environment should generating a reporting for you, which is output. You may have a metrics, you may have a dashboard, you may have other mechanisms that you be generating some artifacts for the compliance perspective. And each of the controllers or each of the security assessments component or each of the tests should be linked to the requirement, should be linked to the why we are doing it. Even the developers, when the developer commit the change into the repositories, they should have the commit message, or they should have the case number in it, so we can have a full traceability. It's not just writing a code. It is not full automating. We should have other artifacts we can train back, go back to what we have done at the past. Go to the next slide.
So I think in terms of the governance of this, here are some metrics. So many times it's focused on speed to market, but we're trying to balance that now against risk. So if we look at security automation, time to delivery, high severity bugs found in production, similarly with threat modeling, compliance, the security development side, and the SecOps side. You have a copy of this deck. You're welcome to take a look at this, but these are just examples of how we can start to integrate this with what's happening on the risk side. So it's not just focused on getting this out quickly, but doing this in a way that helps us to manage our risk at the same time. Next slide, please.
Before that, Altaz, I'm gonna go back to the previous slide one more time. I know it's a really loaded topic, and for them, really, as an organization, define what matters to you. These are the common write-ups, common metrics. But when you're really looking for data collection, ask yourself, what is the reason you're imagining? What type of question you would like to answer it? Then you can define the right metrics for you, because not doing the data collection for the sake of somebody else doing some data collection. Make sure that you're aligning with your business goals, align with your objectives. So ask the question, what is the purpose? What I'm measuring? And then when you ask that question for measurement, you will find the reason, what type of data you might need it. And next one, you will find that, okay, I need to collect data from this pipeline, that data sets, or this tool or that tool. You're going to find out the source. So when you start from the tool, you will never be able to get your answer that we are looking for. It can be a day-to-day jungle for you, which is a problem. Go to the next slide.
So in terms of next steps, just recognize where your current ATO processes aren't working. Just as with any evolution, you want to document your future state and then work backwards from there. Identify the business capabilities and value streams that will help you fill this gap. And we've highlighted some of those areas. Perhaps you will have some additional areas to consider as well. And then look at the metrics that help govern this. And to Hassan's point, they need to answer the question why, which is ultimately going to track some element of the business value around this. And the other thing, just as what Hassan and I are doing here, get involved, help others along the journey. There are several opportunities to get involved with blogs and webinars and articles, but the more everybody contributes to this, the more we're going to get better at this, the more we're going to see how we can actually integrate this together in a way that continues to provide greater and greater value over time. Next slide, please. So just wanted to let you know as well that Security Compass does have a solution called SD Elements, which helps to automate the system that translates and tracks this sort of software security standards into actionable procedures for developers and our operations teams. Next slide, please. just an example of some of the organizations that are currently using SD elements. Maybe we can just throw up a quick poll. If anybody is interested and would like someone from Security Compass to reach out, please feel free to do so. And I think we've got a couple of Q&A questions. Maybe we've got time for one question that we can take on.
So while looking for the questions, and as Alta said, we would like to engage with us. And from the webinar, blog post, or podcast, I recently recorded a podcast. It's available from the SCI website. It's about in detail about the continuous authorization, how we implement DevSecOps perspective. Just engage with us. So we can learn from your case study, and we can understand what the domains we are in. So collectively, we can build up a good security communities. It is not my job. It's not Alta's job. It is our job.
Right, sure. And I'll turn to one of our questions. It asks, please speak to the importance of gathering evidence that the system is being developed and delivered properly. What specific types of evidence are most important to collect, and how should they be presented? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll go first, Hassan, and then maybe you can take it on. So to me, the evidence ultimately from an auditability standpoint comes into whether or not we're able to map to the specific requirements around security. And if not, what is that residual risk? And usually this is done in some kind, or traditionally, some kind of a report that will give you an articulation of what specifically we're doing, what have we done, and what are the areas that we're missing. Now, what we want to do is we want to try and make that integrated. So we want to move away from having just a static report to something that is now integrated with systems. And so we're feeding this information across the platform where everything is integrated now. And if, for example, we've got a particular compliance policy that we need to adhere to, what does that now mean to people who are going to be doing testing or on the operations side or the development side? And the translation exists in the platform itself. So people can go in and the actionable procedures are being done through the platform itself. I'll just pause there for a moment. There's more I can say, but Hassan, I want to give you an opportunity to...
Just going to say the one sentence is here. When I look at evidence, I'm looking for a system that's working. Let's say if I'm writing some instruction to deploy, and I would like to have a script that deploy for me, and I would like the version of that files or the libraries are in my infrastructure as a code concept, I can see as working. This is evidence for me. I'm looking for more working conditions as the dashboard output from system, not somebody said something. I'm looking for a generated artifacts from the systems and working softwares.
Right, and here's another quick question from one of your colleagues. Is there continuous monitoring running on operations systems?
I will take this one. Yeah, please.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No, go on. You can take this. Go ahead.
We have to look at the monitoring. Are long topics. We can talk another hours maybe. I think I should deliberately listen, talk about the monitoring concept. So when we monitor the system, yes, we have to monitor in the operating real environment, production environment. But there is a couple of things we should be monitoring. Maybe looking for application performance. Maybe looking for the security monitoring. Maybe you have an IDSS. Maybe you have an IPSS. Maybe some other system you may have it. But the key point is here, and how we are utilizing the data as from the output of the monitoring. How much we are feeding back to our system development lifecycle, we can get a better addressing the security in that specific lifecycle. We don't want to get the monitoring on the operational side. We would like the monitoring throughout the lifecycle.
All right, that's about our time. Thank you both for presenting, and thank you to all of you for submitting questions and answering the poll questions. For more information about Security Compass, visit securitycompass.com, and to learn more about SCI, visit sci.cmu.edu. Thank you and have a good day.
Thanks.